How do we beat the control? It's a question that I've heard many times, watched loads of videos about it, and it's a super complex issue. Luckily, we've got Lana and Ramiz from Two Desperados who are going to walk us through exactly what changes we could make to perhaps our mindset, to teamwork, and our creative testing methodology in order to beat that control or beat that hero creative. I'm Richard Bond from Expert 360, and here is Lana and Ramiz to help you through. So I'm very lucky today to be joined by two people in UAE for Two Desperados, Lana and Ramiz. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Of course. Hello, and thank you for having us. My name is Lana. I'm the head of marketing at Two Desperados. Have been working here for almost 5 years. So as our company name says, two comes in two. So today you have me and Ramiz with you.
Hello, Richard. Thank you. Thank you for calling us to talk to these topics. My name is Ramiz. I'm the lead of paid acquisition team in the Two Desperados. I'm here like 3 years, something like that.
And I have Two Desperados. Do you want to give us a bit of context about, what makes Two Desperados special and some of your successes?
Yeah, sure. So you might or might not have heard of our top titles, which are Waka Waka and Viola's Quest. They are really famous in the marble shooter, bubble shooter category of casual games, which is our current most successful niche. But we are actually now developing two more products that are probably due next quarter or Q1 in 2022. So stay tuned for more. Waka Waka has been on the market now 6 years, and it's a completely different product, obviously, from when it started, when it had his first anniversary, and now 5 years in, it's completely different. And why? Because we are really focused on quality. We are also really believe that we have only scratched the surface of the opportunities that we're having and how people really love the product. So one of the big roles of marketing is to discover and to really get our games out there. And obviously today we're talking creative testing. So that was one huge part of our expansion, especially in the last year and a half.
Absolutely. And let's dive straight into it. So, let's start with the bad. What are common mistakes that you see or you're aware of or you've heard of that happen when you're thinking about creative testing?
I'll jump to this one. We will share our experiences. So I think the way of creative testing it was changed from the start to now because we didn't know, for example, what was the right approach and everything. For example, we didn't had enough data for every creative. In the start, we started, for example, with really small budgets. We wanted to find out something, and you cannot find out something if you don't have enough data for each creative. That's one thing. And I think one bigger thing was we have now won the first creative test, but we failed with optimization because we was doing, for example, UA campaigns with totally different optimizations, and then when we put that creative which we tested in the for example, mobile app install optimization, it acted completely differently. So that was, that first comes to my mind, a really common mistake that I think a lot of people do. You need to test apples to apples. So that's something that comes first to my mind.
I can also add on to this a bit more in the ideation phase. And it's something that we now tell when we're onboarding new creative people for the creative team. We're like, forget everything that you think will work and forget everything that you might like.
Yeah, you might like it.
So it's kind of always, as you said, like the worst feeling in the world is we were creating this creative that had the entire company raving of how amazing it is, how fun it is, how it's really showing what the game is about. It was super dynamic with really upbeat music. It showed a lot of the layers of the game, and it totally flopped. So it wasn't just the user acquisition and the marketing team. We shared it with the entire company, and everybody was so happy with this video. And it did the worst in creative testing. Why? Because we had our own, feelings attached to it, and you already know what your game is about, and you see it on that video. But you have to go back and say, so these are the people that have never played my game, have never seen it, and just want to see the core mechanics. and let the product kind of show the magic behind it once they're in, because they don't care about all these layers that are happening later on. And we even had feedback from a couple of people in the company, even product owners, being like, but why is this such a boring video in terms of like really slow, not showing a lot of features our winning creative? And we were like, because it shows the core loop the best.
So there's some pretty harsh lessons learned, right? So you're saying, just to kind of summarize, you're saying like you've got to be very careful in terms of, the data that you acquire and making sure that you are looking at the right data to learn from in the first place. And then to ensure that you're actually applying that to the ideation, right? And not putting out something that you think is right, but something that the customers, that the users are going to engage with.
Yeah, that are kind of, I think, pretty common mistake that all do, because they are all gaming companies are in love with their products.
Yeah.
So they, I don't know, they understand it the best, but actually the people who will see it first time, you don't know how they will act. So you need to hear that data from the feedback that you receive from the advertising network on which you do the creative testing.
I totally agree. And the really random story, right? The way that I could get my head around it is one of my first jobs was I used to sell bread in markets. And I would go like first thing in the morning and I'd set up a stall and I'd put the bread out, right? And the owner of the bread shop would come along and he would just get angry at me because of the way I'd set the bread up. And I was like, what is the problem? And he was like, come round here, come round the front. And what had happened was I'd set all the bread up from behind the store, from where I was stood, and I wasn't standing where the customer was. And I think there's a big part of that is sometimes we get lost in the behind the scenes and not what the customer's experience is. And I find that really interesting. You've learned from the bad, so now let's talk about the good. So, because everything is changing all the time, so how do you apply creative testing now? What does good creative testing look like to you?
Firstly, based on which, I don't know, for example, networks are you active? We used to do only creative testing on the Facebook, but nowadays, especially with those iOS 14.5 and 15 IDFA changes and everything changed because Facebook is not at the moment scalable so much. And for example, especially for the iOS creatives, you don't have enough precise data as you used to be. So you kind of need somehow to also to consider the other networks. But what we find out what is really enough data for each creative, so we can make a good decision. For example, we also did some mistakes that we put a lot of creatives, and then your test is lasting long. You don't have enough data and everything. So we are now kind of testing 3 to 5 creatives. Most of the creatives that work Facebook work usually, for example, on the Google. Now we have TikTok, we have Iron Source, we have Facebook. And for example, some creative in the Facebook Insta stories is really, killing with price. It's ultra expensive. But for example, on Iron Source in the TikTok is actually really good. So there is a lot of difference. So you need to consider everything because audience who is watching that is completely different.
Well, I love that you've mentioned this, right? Because it's a completely different thing. So I totally see what you're saying, right? Because now you're thinking not only about like the campaign objectives and like stuff, you're talking around context, around the user context, which is now massive because, we inhabit these apps in completely different ways. So it sounds like you're trying to do a lot of different things in different places. Do you still try and do that, completely new ideas, or are you refining ideas now? Because you must have a few creatives that are just like, these are the best that we've got on all our channels.
70% of iterations of what we know works, and there's like 30% of total innovation. Like, let's do something that is probably not going to work because, as I mentioned, like we have a certain setup of elements that work, which is also something important to really understand what is it that works in a certain creative. We've been testing backgrounds, different paths, more dynamic, less dynamic gameplay, boosters, no boosters, simple gameplay, characters, no characters. This is a no-brainer, but really invest more time into figuring out what is the mix for you. And then we put a twist on that mix. But from time to time, we would go and say, okay, we have enough creatives that are ready to go into ongoing campaigns. Now let's play around a little bit with what could increase our CTRs and our IPMs overall. So what could be different? I think when you mentioned like TikTok, Iron Source, Google, Facebook, and what Ramiz is saying is that they are really different audiences with different intentions. So how we try to help the creative team to reach their goal of getting the results that they want is also by telling them, okay, so we're doing iron source and we're looking for ROS, so we want to get that rewarded video placement. So let's go for portraits, 30 seconds. We're kind of giving them the user acquisition optimization knowledge so that they can understand, okay, so I'm going to have a larger watch time on this ad. Whereas for Facebook, we're like, the 5 seconds are what matters. So don't really stress too much about whatever happens after 10 seconds, right? On the previous question, I just want to add one of the things, I'm not sure how other companies are doing, but we really invest a lot of time into showing the results and the actual KPIs to our creative team, because it is super important that they understand what the hell does it mean when a creative works. Here is what we're looking at. There's a huge CTR, which means we drew attention, but then once they get to the store, they're not installing. So our IPMs are down. They're not looking at reports all day long, but they do understand the basic KPIs of what is needed for the creative test to be successful, so that it happened more than once that our creative guys are like, hey, this creative had a huge CTR, but like really bad IPM. So they were not installing. So they would either cooperate with the ASO team and say, could you maybe match this, coloring a little bit better? What did they see here that they didn't get on the store? What could have been improved? And we really got some really great initiatives out of that. So it's not, it's not to burden someone with like extra work or something, but it's really worth showing them this is how it works. This is why it's valid, so that they can really think better and more strategically while creating the creatives.